Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Siege Show. You may already notice things are a little bit different here, guys. We're not quite in the studio, unfortunately, in renovation mode. Hopefully not too much longer until we can get back in person, but we felt like at least to get something out, this was the best solution. We can just kind of talk. There's a lot that has happened. There's a lot that's going to be happening as well. And it's just good to be back on the Siege Show and just get some content out for everyone.
Yeah, it's lovely to be back. As you mentioned, we may or may not have gotten up to some intriguing stuff over in Brazil, so a lot to talk about there. The game as well, with a huge update across Year 9, Deadly Omen more specifically as well at the moment, a huge shift up for the game and its popularity. So as you mentioned, there's a lot to talk about, and looking forward to having a bit of a yap.
Yeah, let's get straight into it. Of course, elephant in the room, we were able to go over to Brazil, Sao Paulo, specifically for Six Invitational 2024. We found out about that, I guess, well in advance. Really, really nice as well from Ubisoft and Blast, because typically these things can sometimes be very much like a last second. We were able to obviously get wind of this pretty early on. I can't remember exactly when we got the offer. I'm not sure if you actually recall or not, Guz, but
No.
we had obviously a pretty decent lead up into it. We filmed a couple of episodes as well, and obviously kept everything under wrap and key when we were filming those particular episodes. But I would definitely say from our perspective, we were still very much a little bit surprised to obviously get Six Invitational. I know it's strange, and we've kind of spoken about this a little bit before, and very much more than happy to get in depth on this, but we are not, even after SI, even still now, we are not ever going to feel like we are guaranteed to get this kind of work.
No. I know people are probably going to laugh at what you've just said and what I'll reiterate, but we quite literally went in with the expectation that we were not going to be working this event, just because the nature of it is a pair historically has always missed out, and that was still the case with Dev and Mandy unfortunately not attending. So in some respect, I guess we counted ourselves a little bit lucky. On the flip side, we did feel like it was a long time coming and we'd been working really hard towards this goal, but it still did come at somewhat of a pleasant surprise. And I think, we both went into this wanting to give it our very best, and ultimately that led to casting the grand final, which is pretty fucking insane.
Yeah, that obviously was even something different. We could probably touch on that a little bit more down the track here, because there's a lot more really to Six Invitational 2024 than just the grand final. But ultimately, when we found out, we also found out at the time that Dev and Mandy wouldn't be working the event as well, which kind of took a little bit of a sting out of it. We're a team, obviously, in our Oceania crew. And then on the flip side, we obviously found out Rob also, Manic, for those unfamiliar, got the role to do some of the hosting during the group stage, which was fantastic. So it probably did take a little bit of a sting that obviously the entire crew wasn't going, especially coupled with the fact that James had just done the Atlanta Grand Final in the track cast with Parker and Nick. So it was a little bit of a sting out of it, but ultimately we are professionals. We move on. We get on with the job, and obviously we turned our attention to Sao Paulo. The travel, by the way, for those unfamiliar, was 33 hours to get to Sao Paulo.
That's just the flying is 33 hours. If you do the door-to-door number, it was probably closer to like 37, 38, because you think about it, you have to get to the airport 2-3 hours early. And then the distance between the hotel and the actual airport was pretty significant. I think it was like just over an hour's drive as well.
Yeah, about an hour.
Yeah, add like 4 hours onto the 33. It's 37. We fly in, we go straight into like an editorial meeting, and we're like half asleep. And then we're trying to fix our sleep schedule a little bit and stay up a little bit longer. So yeah, really, really long day, really grueling travel. But that's just the fact of being in Australia. Wherever you go, it's going to take forever.
Exactly. We're used to it. We've done this. We did it for Copenhagen. I was able to obviously do it a little bit prior to that too. So at this point, we are very much well-seasoned travelers, but even still, that was definitely an experience I'd rather not do again if we ever go back to Brazil, which I'd certainly love to, because it was great. And I think obviously the crowd was amazing and such, but there's got to be a better way. There is actually a kind of better flight path where we go across the Pacific, but don't need to get into that kind of story. But nevertheless, of course, we get there, and we obviously knew what we were going to be doing, group stage into then the playoffs, and we knew first as well that we were going to be doing at least one of the quarterfinals. So obviously in our contract, when we got the offer, it was already pre-known that we were going to be doing at least one stadium cast, which I think was great. Obviously, to understand that we were going to do that already and not have it be like a question mark leading in. It was really nice. We got to obviously get a suit and, you know, understand we were going to do at least one stadium cast. For those unfamiliar, obviously we didn't get to do one in Copenhagen. So while we were able to do a major, we didn't really get to do the best parts of that. So when we got this offer and we knew we were at least going to get one stadium cast, it really did make it feel like we were going to be there for the whole time. Big part of the main portion of the show at the end. But in terms of finding out about the grand final, that was found out on rehearsal day for the arena. So a day before the quarterfinals is when we found out about the grand final.
Yeah, and I feel like I've told a couple of people this story, but the way in which we found out was just the most, I guess, surreal is probably the way to explain. It just didn't feel real at the time at all. There was a couple of us that got pulled aside after a little bit of a group meeting before the rehearsal. For those unaware, of course, we go to the arena the day before. A lot of it is really for production to go through, rehearsals and camera angles and, testing tech. As talent, we don't really do a whole lot. The desk does a bit, but casters kind of just a props. But we have a bit of a meeting before we start the day, a long day at that. And at the conclusion of that, a few of us get pulled aside. So it was you and I, and then also Fluke and Carter, who were casting the show match. And we genuinely thought that Jake thought that you were going to get in trouble, because this was also after the VPDZ game where you dropped probably the biggest F-bomb in the history of R6 Esports off the back of an insane clutch where you really went in, and it was
a hard fuck.
Yeah, it was a very hard fuck, and we're like, okay, Jake's probably going to get a talkie to. They'll be like, okay, that was a pretty hype clip. It was exciting, but maybe just tone it down. Maybe don't do it in the live portion. So again, Hap Carter, they get told they're doing the show match, and then just basically at the drop of a dime, one of the Blast product managers just says, okay, Jake and Guzz, you guys are doing the grand final. And my reaction was, wait, you serious? And I said that like twice, I think. And then it was just like, okay, I guess we're doing the fucking grand final. What the hell?
Yeah, I think that obviously we were both shocked. And as you said, there was actually some comments I remember after the VP game where people are like, oh, I hope he's not going to get fined, or he is going to get fined, or anything like that. The stipulation, at least from Blast's perspective, is that swearing's fine as long as it's done properly. And there's actually meaning to it, and it's not something that's overdone. And I agree from that perspective as a caster as well. Outside of just, tournament organizer rules, I wouldn't be going around dropping F-bombs on a broadcast. It's not professional. If you do it once a year, yeah, it's fine. And if you do it well, yeah, it's fine. And I think obviously in that instance, it was just raw, passionate. It was a very significant moment, meant a lot, and the play itself was obviously great. And I think the fuck was warranted. But I probably was expecting them to just kind of be like, hey, love it, great, love the energy, passion, but we're into the finals now, maybe just don't go that far. And when they obviously let us know that we were doing the grand final, yeah, it was quite surreal. I think, one thing I want to kind of speak candidly on, I thought like we had a really good group stage working with all of the other talent. And I think also working the playoffs then together, we had some really good games. And the VP game as well was also exceptionally good. And I think at the time probably almost ended up being like the game of the tournament going into then the finals. So I thought we had a really good tournament. We had really good prep and build up heading into SI. We've been working really, really hard. And just to probably get, the reward for effort was obviously great. At the end of the day, though, then there's others who have obviously been in the scene for such a long time who typically do these kind of events. Obviously, in Tero and Pengu, there's an Ace, for example. So you do probably feel a little bit of that camaraderie where it's like, oh, should these guys be doing it instead of us? But at the end of the day, we were selected. There's nothing we can do about that. It's not up to us. All we can do is just put on a good show and do our best. And obviously the other talent are very much understanding of that as well. In terms of adding Nick to the broadcast, Pengu, that was my decision to begin with. I went to Blast and I said, I think actually a TriCast for the SI Grand Final should be the way that we go about setting the tone for arguably what was hoping to be one of the best of all time with the crowd element, Brazil, etc., and it ended up being that I felt like adding the TriCast was going to be the best way to get the most out of the broadcast. But those are unaware as well. Like, that is a very unselfish thing to do. I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, but it's like very easy to just be like, hey, you're doing the grand final, and then be like, all right, cool, we're gonna just take that, run with it. It's our spotlight now. To add Nick to that, I feel like, and I feel very vindicated because I think it worked out really, really well. And it's not about like, oh, I don't think we as a duo could have not done as good a job, but I just felt like for the broadcast, it was definitely worth getting him in. I really enjoyed the cast that I did with him as well in the group stage, and so ultimately worked out. Blast said yes, and we got to do the TriCast with Pengu, which ended up just going perfectly. Now, mind you, we had never worked with him in a TriCasting capacity, so I was a little nervous. I was a little bit unsure as to how things would go, but he was an utter professional. Both of us had worked with him in the group stage. And obviously both of us had done plenty of TriCasts before. All of us had done that. And so it worked out perfectly. No one stumbled. I felt like we had a tremendous cast for the grand final, and we had a tremendous game to cast. It was just all perfect, and great for the game, great for the esport. And obviously we're very fortunate that we were a big part of that.
Yeah, I think when you first approached me in regards to the TriCast, I was a little bit hesitant. And I think probably the main reason for that was just the lack of experience that we did have together at that point with Nick specifically. But I think I was really comforted by the fact that, you and him more specifically had a really good cast together. Obviously, Nick is just great to work with in general. And I also went back to the point that I have hammered on for years now, how I do think that TriCasts, especially in a live environment, is the best way for Siege to be broadcasted. So it would have been incredibly hypocritical to then turn around after you get the SI Grand Final and be like, oh, we're going to take it for ourselves. So yeah, I think it was a fantastic decision, and it worked out really well. And as I sort of said at the time, I hope it sets the precedent that going forward, it does mean there's more TriCast opportunities at major grand finals.
I think so.
And at SI Grand Finals as well.
I think it's also great for the entire talent team as well. I think that we're very privileged and fortunate in Siege that we've got, such a really good core group across the board, across all regions. And so hopefully this becomes that trend that continues on. Obviously, we had James do Atlanta with Intero and Parku, and I hope that is then something that continues into Manchester as well. And it just then offers up more opportunities for everyone to be able to do, say, a grand final, for example. And the fact that we were able to do a grand final should say to everyone, hey, this can be something that all talent are able to do. You put the work in, there's the reward. And so I think that's great from a talent's perspective. Obviously, we were the benefactors. It's very easy to, be happy with that because it was us. But even if it wasn't us, and say it was like, a Lynx and Stokes or a Hap and Fluke, I think I would have been more than happy for them, but also the fact that it would be like, hey, maybe we can actually get this opportunity. So it was really good from that side of things.
I will just say, I think it's, again, really important to remember that, again, TriCast, in my opinion, and it's easy to say this because we're in the position, but it should be double color and single play-by-play. And the problem that we have in Rainbow Six is that, as much as people want to say that they're hybrids and whatever, the only two hard dedicated colors I think we have are myself and Nick. So other talent, I think, if they want more TriCast opportunities, probably need to specialize a little bit more to really enhance that, because I don't think it would work as well with hybrid roles. I mean, you could make it work, especially if you have a lot of experience together, but I don't think it would be quite as good. And this is a discussion we had, right? We were very keen to do the TriCast off the bat, or at least you definitely were. And the discussion basically quickly came down to, are we going to do Parker or are we going to work with Nick? And to Parker's credit, he was incredibly... I think he took it very, very well. He didn't seem, upset that we were working it. He was incredibly supportive, and I'm very thankful for him in having that approach. And I mean, he basically took himself out of the race. He probably understood that him joining the TriCast was probably not going to be best for the broadcast. So he made that decision on his own accord, I believe. And like I said, very thankful for the advice that he offered us and the way in which he handled it, because it would have been very easy. There's no obligation for him to be nice to us because we got the event, because we got the grand final or anything like that. He could have just ignored us and kept to himself, and we wouldn't have been upset at that. That would have been perfectly fine. But he definitely went out of his way to, comfort us and give us advice when we asked for it.
Yeah, and I think the goal always was get that hard color in, hence Pengu, and And again, I just really enjoyed his cast, and in the end, it worked out really, really well. The match itself was amazing. I mean, seriously, we went into it expecting. I expected W7M to win, but I probably didn't expect it in the fashion that it played out in. I probably like a 3-1 or something, and it was going to be great and exciting. I always expected the grand final itself to be great. The build up to it was great. The crowd was great. FaZe coming in from the upper bracket started really well. Won out so comfortably on Oregon that it was like, okay, we could go the distance here. But even still, even after that beginning, at no point could we have ever predicted the way it was going to finish. Like the 6-1 comeback on Nighthaven Labs, for example, and everything that happened in between it. Sometimes it gets lost a little bit in translation, but there was the massive comeback on Skyscraper as well from FaZe Clan. A lot of people, I've seen some people talk about, but prior to Nighthaven, like all of the individual maps were quite one-sided. It was kind of like one of those, like, oh, this is all one-sided until we get to the 5th map. But Skyscraper was a classic in itself. And I also think, Oregon was like the most one-sided. It was no contest there. But even Border was pretty good, had its moments. Remember the 1v3 clutch that we saw from Nate. So it was arguably the best game of Siege that we've ever had in terms of a series. And it just so happened to be the SI Grand Final.
Yeah. It's still really weird to think that, we were there and casting it. At least from my perspective, it's very difficult to absorb that. And I didn't feel super like overwhelmed with emotion at the end because it was just very difficult to take it all in. I was actually in preparation for this, watching back a bit of the VOD and stuff, and it was like, I think starting to sink in a little bit more, like, holy shit, we got to cast, the best game of Siege ever played pretty much. And it was just a grueling series. I think the way I would describe it, and I think I said this immediately in the aftermath, was that despite this series in real time going for 5 to 6 hours from point to point or whatever it was, it genuinely, from my perspective, felt like it went by in the blink of an eye. It felt like 15 minutes. Now, that was when we were inside of the server. Outside of the server, in between the breaks, that's a whole different story because you were like physically on the limit, really pushing yourself. And like, I genuinely thought that like you were going to fucking pass out or something.
Do you want to put the pictures up? I mean, like we've got some of the behind the scenes pictures. I don't know how easy it would be to overlay it, but like I was legitimately on the floor and, and it wasn't for show or anything. It was quite literally, I had, probably gone a little too hard in the opening map. It was very easy to get excited. I was doing a grand final. And as much as I've been doing this for such a long time, this is quite literally the biggest event that you can do. And then coupled with the best game that you can do. We've reached that peak. Like there's nothing more now to look forward to and be like, okay, we've done this. Now we're going to do this. That's just the nature of it. And so it was very easy to get a little bit excited. I've watched back my opening intro when we got thrown from Ian, and I hate it. Like, I just think I completely butchered it, went too fast, I was just too excited. It's fine in the moment, the passion of it all, and I get it. And the crowd made it very difficult because they were so loud.
You can't hear yourself.
It's really difficult to, like, modulate your voice. Yeah. But obviously that first map, I just looking back on it and, a bit of self-reflection and even in what was the best grand final of all time, you're always going to be able to try and look inward and try and see how can I be better. Probably would have been just control myself a little bit more in that opening map. That first 30 to 40 minutes of the entire show, I definitely should have just calmed down a little bit. And I went too hard too soon and therefore paid the price. And from then, I'd say even map 2 onwards, I was already starting to feel it. And this was also a reason why I said originally, let's get in Pengu, because I think heading in the TriCast, if this goes the distance, like it was hot in that arena. Like there was no air conditioning. The air conditioning had to be, put in. I guess Ubisoft Blast organized getting their own AC just for the building, and so it was all of these like silver pipes, pumping in air, and that's all we really had. So it was hot, very hot. I mean, just naturally hot in Brazil. Already pretty much running on fumes by map 2. So it was excruciating. I had to push harder than I've ever pushed before. Find energy, try and modulate. And I think if you go back and actually watch the cast by map 2, like map 1, there's a lot of meat. Then map 2, there is fuck all. Like I'm just like, you two need to do 90% of the work right now because I need to basically just do the end round play-by-play. And I think that's the way it should be anyway. So it worked out perfectly. But yeah, like between the maps, like I'm basically on the floor. At one point, I poured water over my head. It was just that hot. And again, not playing it up, but by map 5, I was having a migraine. Like I was like, every time I would finish a call, my head felt like it was exploding because it was just intense pressure being pushed out. And again, not playing this up, and it's not like a, I don't know how to say, this is not like a positive. Like this was actually a negative because I actually exerted too much pressure too early on and paid the consequences. But yeah, I was feeling it. By map 5, if there was a map 6, I would have died.
Yeah, I don't think I quite had the same physical toll, but obviously very, very different role. So I didn't have to exert as much energy. I guess one question I have is, how do you feel about the end call that you made? Obviously, that's, you know, a huge role for the play-by-play caster. How much thought did you give? What was the build-up like? How are you feeling when FaZe sticks one up? Like, talk us through it.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I wanted W7M to win. But you obviously try and not let that, not like I'm a fanboy. Like I just felt like they had the best storyline. Like I'm not sitting there like rooting for W7M. You know, if you go back and listen to the call, there was a lot, like, I mean, there was a lot of, plaudits going to FaZe throughout that entire series, building them up, and throughout Oregon especially, they looked amazing. And then obviously on Nighthaven Labs, I'm talking about them now crowning themselves as world champions, all of that. So there was no bias in the actual cast, but internally, I'm sitting here like, oh, I kind of hope W7 win. I've got a better call for them. FaZe's call wasn't going to be really all that amazing, and FaZe winning for the history books probably wasn't going to be that amazing. Unless they then went on and did other things in Manchester, etc. So I had workshopped the call with a lot of the talent. Was it the night before? Or no, it wasn't even the night before. I think it was like when we kind of found out that night. Just to kind of start like trying to grab some little pieces, get a little bit of help on it. I really didn't want to go into this and be like, no, it's my call. Like no one has any say. It was just more so, hey, who can throw in an idea or there? And one of the main ones I used was actually from Lynx, who brought up the 2 trophies and now a hammer. And I loved that because it signifies the difference between winning 6 Invitational and a major, or 2 for that matter. And so I used that from Lynx. And then the rest of it was, you know, the coronation and stuff I just kind of came up with as like crowning. So, you know, are we going to crown a new champion and then the coronation, etc. So that was pretty much planned, ready to go before the game had even started in terms of that very final call. And then so you know that, and then you kind of tie into it. I actually can't remember what I had written down for FaZe. And the other thing as well, and I said this in an episode, when we had James on for a Jake and Guzz show episode, you know, he spoke about what he had written down for his final call of Atlanta, you know, the promise and delivering and all of that. And I was kind of like, oh, I kind of like off the cuff, you can get a little bit more emotion. And the thing is, had I been a little bit more off the cuff with it, I would have mentioned the comeback. I would have mentioned the trials and tribulations of coming back on Nighthaven Labs, you know. But because it was all pre-planned, pre-written, you don't touch on the game itself. You're just talking about the overarching storyline, the last dance, you know, can they be the greatest of all time? All of those kind of things. But to answer your question, I think that the call was delivered great. I'll be harsh on myself and I'll also praise myself. I think the call was great. Gave the crowd its space and its air before delivering the call. And I was very happy with it. It's very easy to get nervous in those moments and be like, "Oh, don't stuff this up. You don't want to stumble."
That's actually like
on a word.
That's what I was curious
when you're doing that call.
Were you nervous at any point? Especially, I feel like because it was elongated for so long, it's 6-1, and you're probably stressing a little bit. You're like, "Oh, I don't really want FaZe to win. My call might not be that good. Well, I'm gonna have to go with it anyway."
By that point, though, see, this is the thing. By
or you
that
just
point,
swept up in the moment.
Yeah, you're swept up in the moment. So by that point, I had something written for FaZe, and I'm basically ready to live for it. And so I'm not sitting there like, oh, you know, I hope W7M come back. I'm very much ready to go to deliver FaZe's moment. That's my mindset at that point. But also, at the end of the day, it's also defense Nighthaven Labs. You can't give up on the game. And so then you have to also kind of find a way to portray the fact that W7M can still get back into this game. that they have more than enough of a chance of being able to come back one round at a time. This is what they can do. This is what it looks like. And they obviously ended up doing that. But I'm not sitting there at 6-1 like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do the W7M call. Like, that's so unprofessional. But I am very much kind of like hoping that this call for FaZe is going to be good. I'm not sure how it's going to be perceived because it's far more off the cuff, and it's not like, everyone had been talking about dynasties and Last Dance. There was already so much overarching storylines built up for W7M. It was a very easy call, to be honest. But for FaZe, it was going to be far more difficult because no one really expected them to have probably won. And then to win 7-1 on the last map kind of takes the sting out of it. Had FaZe won that final map, 7-1, 7-2, no one would have regarded this grand final as the best of all time. Absolutely. I don't think so, personally. I think it needed that cherry on top to, say, overtake 2018. And we got that cherry, fortunately. But I wasn't really nervous in terms of the call. I wasn't really nervous in terms of the game. I don't think you were either. I think we were actually pretty calm going into it. I'd been in these kind of positions before. And so, like, obviously, final call. The main thing in my mind is just don't start it. Just don't stumble over it. Deliver it and then live with it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my own personal, like, build up in server, I feel like going back to Parker as well, because he asked me a couple of times in the build up, oh, like, how you feeling? Are you excited? Yada, yada, yada. And like every single time I would just like straight bat it and say, I'm just hyper focused. I wasn't letting, because I know myself personally, if I had have let the emotions get to me and overwhelm me before heading into the game, that's when the nerves begin to follow and that's when I begin to overthink. Whereas I just went in with the mindset that, sure, it's not the same as every other game, but in a sense it is. And if the game is good and justifies it, I can ride that emotion, and I think I did properly. So I just, going into it and throughout the server, throughout the game itself, just remained, really hyper focused and just confident in my ability. There was no point overthinking or changing the formula too much for this match. Again, the gravity and the stakes are very, very high, and you need to match that energy.
500,000 people watching,
and also record viewership and 10,000 screaming fans. But I'm really happy that that's the approach that I personally took, because I think it worked. Because I made a couple of mistakes throughout the cast, no doubt, but
so did I.
But I didn't stumble near as much as I thought I was going to. So
I had the worst stumble of the entire tournament. I think it was on Border, where sometimes when you're talking as a caster, you just kind of get halfway through it and then you just blank. And
you
then
forget what you were talking about. Yeah.
You're just like, oh, fuck. And then you just stop. I actually had one of those moments, but you can't let that define you. And no one's going to go back and remember it. Not one person have I ever seen has gone like, oh, he made this little stumble in Border round 3. Like, you just move on.
Yeah.
And maybe in the moment, Twitch chat's like, question mark, lolcaster or whatever, but then that's it. I do have to ask, though, obviously, since we were not projected in the stadium, did that alleviate nerves? Like, if it was like 10,000 English-speaking fans listening to your cast in the stadium, would that have maybe amped the nerves up a little bit?
Yeah, probably. I feel like I mentioned this to you, or I mentioned it to someone, that it definitely probably did help. I wouldn't say that I'm a particularly great public speaker. I would hate doing it at like assemblies. I've done it at a funeral here or there as well, and hearing your own voice getting projected, I just kind of hate it, which is very ironic to say as a fucking esports caster when you're commentating in front of 500,000 people, but that's just the way it is. I think I preferred it. I mean, we had the crowd for the atmosphere and the energy, so much so that, like I said, you could hardly hear yourself. I had my side tone up all the way, so you can hear yourself through your headset, but with the crowd, almost impossible. And then hearing your co-caster as well was very, very difficult. So it was often challenging to actually have back and forth chats and talk about coherent points because you could hardly hear what the other person was saying. But yeah, back to your point.
It was a very challenging cast.
Yeah, I think it did alleviate some of the pressure, but obviously the pressure was there and I wanted to do a good job, but I didn't let it get to me too much. I feel like that's one of my strengths, is that I don't succumb to pressure too much. That's all my 1v2s in ranked coming into fruition.
All right, well, we won't obviously beat up on this forever. Obviously, we could probably talk about this the entire episode. There is more to this episode than just the grand final. We'll put a bow on this. If there's any comments, if anyone wants to ask any specific questions pertaining to really Six Invitational 23 or the grand final match, from a casting perspective, or just our experiences, please let us know in the comments down below, and obviously we can get back to you. And I'm sure this is probably going to be a conversation that will be had again in future, but ultimately we can kind of just summarize it really as dream turning into a reality. Not really ever expecting this to have happened, but it did, and I felt like we absolutely killed it. It was great to have Nick on the TriCast. It was a great match. It was the best match. It's going to be incredibly difficult to top. I hope it gets topped one day, because that would be amazing to watch whatever could beat that, but I just don't know if it'll happen anytime soon. And hopefully everyone at home also enjoyed not just the cast, but obviously the match itself. So moving on away from Six Invitational to Operation Deadly Omen, as we continue here for the Siege show. A lot to unpack. We obviously got the fortunate pleasure of being able to kind of watch the reveal before it was revealed. I think about a couple of days beforehand, and immediately everyone's reaction was positive. And I remember then also watching it get revealed in the stadium, and the stadium's reaction was positive. Online reactions were positive. And now that we've had a little bit of time, guys, the post reveal reactions and everyone getting to play around with it still is actually largely positive, which is really good.
Yeah, I feel like I've got listed as the last dot point in terms of the player count, but I guess we can open up with that. Again, Steam charts, as I always say, is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the PC player base. Never mind the overall player base. We have seen the overall numbers, and holy shit, they're actually insane. It's actually insane. But we've seen a huge spike with this season. I believe it's also a free weekend at the moment as well, post-launch. So that's obviously going to bloat the number a little bit. But it feels like there's a lot of positive sentiment around the game at the moment, and around this patch specifically. I think there's been a lot of great quality of life changes, and Deimos as well is a fantastic addition and provides some interesting play as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Deimos is one that I've kind of spoken a little bit about. We've already begun for the Korea League, and we've seen some action, and whether or not he's good, worth using, and where his strengths and weaknesses are. I think, speaking objectively from a playing perspective, now I haven't actually gotten the chance to play with him just yet, but we've played against him quite a bit, and it's interesting kind of the communication around when someone on your team has been death marked. And then it's like, where's Deimos? Like, immediately, that's like the first question is like, well, where is he? And so that's such powerful information that you can have as a defender, where where one attacking operator is. And guess what? If he's playing with the rest of the attacking lineup, you're going to get a real good inclination as to where they're attacking from as well. So you need to be very, very good when you play Deimos. I think he's actually a good operator, but I don't think your average player is going to be able to get the most out of him. In fact, I think they'll turn it into a negative experience. And so you have to be really, really good with the way that you're using your death marks. I think you get like 3 of them. They last quite a while. So there's a lot of information that gets, laid out into the server. Communication is so critical for both sides. Like, if you are the Deimos, you need to be commenting to your team where your death mark location target is. And ultimately then also vice versa for the defending team as to where the Deimos is. In terms of comp play, we've already seen him a little bit, and like teams are barely even using the death mark. They're also just running around with the Vendetta, which I think that gun is insane. I think the Vendetta is nuts, and when people figure out the best way to use his death marks, that's when you're going to see the most of Deimos.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a long time for Deimos' full potential to really be brought out, even at a pro level, because, as you mentioned, there's so many layers of complexity. And as the Deimos, right, are you going to play as a lurk to try and be a false flag for where the push is coming from? Are you going to try and use it as a bait tool? Then as the defense, how do you respond? Are you going to exchange out the roamer and put the deathmark player back on side and replace that position? Are you going to double stack on that player to provide them support? I will say, though, I think in terms of the fundamental design, it's really good for all play levels, right? Whether it be casual, ranked, or pro, because it's the ultimate solo queue operator, or like no com operator, because to play him and to be effective, you need to be able to communicate and relay that information to the rest of the team. Vice versa, if you're on the receiving end, you need to be able to then communicate where Deimos is. And also it encourages more teamwork overall. So I don't think he's going to be incredibly powerful and a must pick at any point in time, but I do think that smart players and teams will be able to extract value from him. I do also think that Deimos is a really good operator if you have an advantage in say a 2v1. That's where he could also be quite useful, and if you got the right systems in place and the correct synergy, you can convert some nice advantages there. But yeah, keen to see how he develops, because I feel like, again, he's gonna be one of those operators in 6-12 months time when people really start to get a good feel for him. He's probably going to play out quite differently to how he does now, where players are just kind of randomly picking roamers and not communicating properly.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I don't think it's going to be one where it's like that immediate impact that we would typically see from like super overpowered defensive operators, for example, that have made their way in previously. Your Fenris, your Solaces, your Zamis, your Two Browns, for example. Like from the get-go, you're just like, yeah, OP, used, banned, etc. Deimos probably isn't going to fit that mold, but I do think with the longevity aspect, I can see him being a very prevalent attacking operator in future, and even already now there are teams that are picking him in Pro League, so clearly I think a good future ahead. Curious to see if he does get tweaked here or there, but ultimately I think thumbs up in terms of an operator that obviously does change up the game again a little bit. Moving forward, something that has been changed as well is, again, shields, is explicitly the blitz rework again. I think we're already seeing quite a lot of blitz. Montang as well is going to be a big factor as well with that. Shield's obviously super important. We've already seen so much shield play in the first couple of play days of Pro League. So clearly these changes have been quite beneficial.
Yeah, so for those unaware, obviously Shield's getting a significant buff across the board. Hipfire has been retracted, and so too has Melee, but it's now been exchanged for being able to charge through barricades and through defenders, which is very powerful, and being able to knock them down, similar to an Oryx, for instance. And you can also then throw smokes or other utility and reload behind the shield without exposing. So I think overall it's a significant buff. And we've already seen this, filter into pro play. D+ in Korea League, they're running the double shield plus Deimos combo and using that as a means to really quickly clear the map. And I think we could definitely see teams that want to lean into that aggression play shields quite prevalently, because the best way to counter them is to create range. And if you can close down that space as a shield, it really can help you as an attacking lineup. So I'm very intrigued to see, teams from like Brazil, for instance, and, even just hyper-aggressive teams and ranked and whatever, extract value. And I probably wouldn't be shocked if eventually we get to the point where shields need a slight nerf down, probably in movement speed, just because they can close the gap so quickly. I know there is that counterplay in terms of shooting the shield and slowing it down. Although I haven't really seen a lot of people doing that just yet. Whether or not that's a lack of knowledge or it's just not that good, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. One thing that also has made its way in is now the pre-visualization of projectiles in this patch, which I think my initial reaction was immediately like shaking my head and being like, this is not really needed. But that's probably from like a Pro League perspective. I think from a playing perspective, having used it now, it does simplify the mechanic a little bit. You're thinking about situations where you're throwing like a nitrocell over a reinforced wall, for example. The gap is quite small. You've got to really line it up the right way. Otherwise, it's going to hit the roof and it just doesn't go anywhere. And I think that obviously has helped. Or even, for example, from a distance, trying to get it out through a window. For casual play, I think it's a buff. I think it's actually really good. I think it's fine for the game. I kind of understand maybe you kind of look at like other FPS titles. This is something that's on during like your practice servers, and then you go into the main game and you don't have it on anymore. But I don't think it's like Siege. I think it fits Siege fine at casual level. My issue is more so pro play level. Pro players probably shouldn't have this.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think part of the reason why it's in the game is because projectiles, whether it's the case or not, can sometimes feel a little bit inconsistent and lack the responsiveness that you get from, say, utility in CS, where you throw it in this place at this point in time, you learn those lineups, it's part of the culture of the game, and it will work every single time. In Siege, it doesn't quite feel like that, so I feel like they've remedied it with this particular change. Should it be in pro play? It's such a tough discussion because you still got things like yellow ping, and I think they've very much laid the groundwork or the philosophy that we want the game to basically be played the same outside of like the match format itself, with first to 7. Every other element of the game, almost outside of a couple of very minute things, is the same as your ranked experience. And with things like Siege Cup coming and stuff, that's probably why they're going to keep it, homogenized or whatever, keep it the same. So should it be in pro play? Probably not. But it's consistent with other decisions. So I don't think it's the absolute end of the world. And I would say on the balance of everything, it's tough because obviously Nitro Cells and Impacts now get a lot more versatility and a lot more consistency, but that can also be flipped to flash lineups, nade lineups, etc. So I don't think it really favors one side over the other in terms of attack defense, and it is nice quality of life. So it's an okay change. I don't hate it. It is something I shook my head at. Probably the only thing I shook my head at is when we watched the reveal, but playing it, it's not that bad.
There's also, you've got written here, data ban rework. You'll have to rephrase that for me.
So part of the player protection for this season is Ubisoft are reworking the way in which they implement data bans. So if people have suspicious statistics or whatever data they're tracking, my assumption would be that over the last season, the last couple of seasons or year or two or whatever, they've been collecting data and then probably cross-analyzing that with bans and seeing, how they can make it more effective. Because as far as I understand, there already were data bans in place, but they were pretty useless. So it sounds like they're implementing a system to make that better. That said, I played ranked last night and versed an obvious couple of wallers, so I have no idea if it's actually going to be effective. We'll have to wait and see, but good to see that, more progress is being made towards anti-cheat, which is always positive.
Yeah, certainly so. Something that's obviously a bit of a focus in terms of the Year 9 roadmap is that for basically every season, there's some kind of anti-cheat update, obviously coming to each one, which I guess we can now transition to the roadmap itself and kind of
wait. What about ADS attachment changes? I feel like that you brushed over that. That's pretty significant, right?
Did skip over that. I gotta be honest, I kind of want your view more on this because I'm a bit of a pleb and I actually don't really notice that much of a difference. Like certain operators have now picked up like ACOGs, for example. You look at like Goyo, for example. That maybe this is a buff for them. Others, it's a bit of a nerf. But overall, I'm not really noticing the lack of 1.5x. There's still magnified scopes that essentially emulate that anyway. So has this change actually been that massive from your perspective?
Yeah, I think so. In my eyes, the biggest reason that this change was made was in response to community feedback that we were going down this TDM meta route. Some of that facilitated by the 1.5 not having really any downside, but also the ADS speed being a little bit too fast still. Now, that has been slowed over the years. It was instant back in the day. They've gradually slowed it alongside the lean mechanic as well, but now it's been slowed even further. And I love now that you have to really make more deliberate decisions with your attachments because the high magnification you go, the slower ADS you have. Now with things like the horizontal grip, you can opt to go for slightly faster movement speed or you can have better recoil control. So I think overall this has been a really positive change for the game. It has taken me and it's still taking me time to adjust just because of my muscle memory with the old ADS speed and old sights. It takes a little bit to unlearn that. And you do have to sometimes, change your approach a little bit. You can't be as aggressive just sprinting into sight and clearing angles and hoping that you can then quickly ADS and find a headshot. You have to genuinely sometimes just hold ADS and find picks. And I think it was a clip from maybe Wettables or some other pro where that's the play style they were implementing. Hold down ADS and clear the pie that way. So I think it has fundamentally changed the way in which gunfights play out. The other point as well, very briefly, is now shotguns have actually inadvertently been nerfed. The laser sight now impacts ADS speed as opposed to spread, even on shotguns still. So hopefully that's something that gets a little bit adjusted. It may have been why back in the a couple seasons ago they buffed shotguns in preparation for this, maybe. I don't know, but shotguns now feel a little bit worse. So something to maybe change.
Right. So now moving on to Year 9 roadmap, which obviously got revealed as well at Six Invitational. Obviously, Operation Deadly Omen has already made its way out. So you've got still 3 more seasons, in which case only one new operator, which will be in Season 3. Obviously, Recruit's getting a bit of a rework, and then another operator gets a remaster, is what they're calling it, in Season 4. I guess, is there anything in particular that, looking at the roadmap for yourself, where there's 1 or 2 things that you go, okay, that really stands out, really looking forward to this?
I think for me, my eyes automatically go towards, I believe it's season 3, where the Siege Cup is going to be
Yeah,
released.
that was my one. That was my
Yeah,
one.
I mean, it makes sense because we're involved in the pro scene, but new in-game tournament feature to provide a competitive experience. What exactly that format will look like, I think they may have mentioned it's like a bi-weekly BO1 single elim bracket with rewards. Not entirely sure if that will end up being the case, but really sorely needed. We've seen games like Valorant, League has had it for quite some time with Clash as well. You know, the ability for players to be indoctrinated into the more competitive side of the game, and longer term, everyone in the comp scene will reap the benefits of that because everyone will continue to strive to improve. New players will come up the ranks. Also an opportunity for those underage to play in a competitive environment as well. So really, really good change. And if by that time the anti-cheat is quite tight, then it's going to be a really fun experience and something that I'm looking forward to playing.
Yeah, I think season 3 for me is like the one that I'm looking at, and for a couple of reasons. You mentioned Siege Cup. I certainly looked at that as well, and I was like, yeah, that's going to be great. I think for the game and for the esports scene, and obviously pathways that can kind of grow from that. Then there's also shooting range during to have access, well, matchmaking, which is really, really important, especially in regions like Oceania, where if you're trying to play ranked late at night, you might be sitting there for quite a while. If you want to be able to at least just kind of keep warm, I think that's actually a really, really good change. The other part of it as well is like just the simplicity of like, you know, you're sitting in a 4-stack waiting for that 5th person to join you in the shooting range. 5th person joins, and then it's like, oh, well, now we're waiting on you because you've got to like leave the shooting range and we've got to queue up. So I think that's a really, really good change. And then another one as well from season 3 is the custom 1v1 preset. So I know that's not like super massive, and obviously we're seeing a lot of the 1v1s already take place, but I think just having a preset for it makes it even easier. Obviously, it's turning into a bit of a meta within Siege, where we're seeing these like 1v1 tournaments with content creators, big streamers, pro players. And so therefore, I think just having that kind of integrated into the game is also a really good thing as well. Not to say that season 2, season 4 don't have great changes coming, but I just kind of look at season 3 and think collectively as a whole that it's going to be a great one, coupled with the fact that it'll also have a new operator too. So season 3 is one that I'm looking forward to.
I think as well, probably the second point, and it depends on how far it ends up getting taken, but that's console PC crossplay. That is going to be massive for the game.
Season 4.
Again, especially in minor regions like ours, it's going to speed up matchmaking significantly. As far as I understand, it will be opt-in for consoles, so it's not like you're just going to get farmed by PC players if you don't want to, which makes sense. But my question then is, do they take this a step further? Are they now at that point going to more officially support keyboard and mouse and, you know, funnel those players into the PC queue? And then from that, will those console players be eligible for things like community cups? Probably not quite the tier 1 level due to other reasons like MOS and all that stuff. But is there a world in which we see more cross-play competition, which again, much like Siege Cup, would have a really positive flow-on effect? You expose console players to that sort of environment. Eventually, they may then look to transition to PC, and then you have a whole new wave of players coming through at the top level potentially.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think also when it comes to console play, the fact that they've got to opt into it does kind of mean for me, I'm not looking at it that intently, because I think the vast majority probably won't want to play against PC players. But I also look at it, and you kind of brought it up already, and you think about like Oceania, for example, so regions where maybe activity is going to be quite low during off-peak hours. On peak, it's all fine. There's no issue on PC or console in terms of on-peak hours, but like your off-peak hours at 2 a.m. and you're sitting on console and it's like, are you struggling to find a game? Just flick on the Switch and go join PC, and suddenly opens up a bit of a pathway for both avenues. That goes across the board as well for all regions, mind you. And also then there's going to be console players that honestly are good enough on controller that they can probably be PC players. Siege is that kind of game where you can get it done. Jinxie plays on console, so obviously you've seen what he's been able to do even against like a Bolo, for example. I genuinely think like the top end console players are more than good enough to play against your average PC player. Are they good enough then against like the top PC players? Probably not. But I think for them to have a more broadened experience, it's going to be great for them. For PC players, then it's kind of just like, well, if they're there, they're there. I don't think, at least in Siege, this is going to turn into something like Apex, for example, where Apex controller is the dominant device to be used, even at Pro League level. For those unfamiliar, like it's all about the roller, as they say, which is just such a Gen Z term. But I don't think that'll happen in Siege, so I got no issues.
Yeah, I mean, there's no aim assist on console, and as far as I'm aware, there's no plan to add it. So that's a positive, and I don't really see there being any negative fallout from that addition. I think it will be good. And I mean, they specifically mentioned it's a 1.0, so I don't know what the fuck that means, but it sounds like there could be further iterations.
Yeah, that's a weird one, isn't it? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, what's console to PC 2.0 going to look like? I don't know. That's an interesting thing that you bring up. Stage 1 preview, esports, to kind of close out this episode of the Siege show. Obviously, we've kind of kicked off now for the 2024 campaign. Stage 1 has begun. We've had the pleasure of opening the campaign as we closed the last one, which is such a rare thing to do, but hey, we did it. We've begun with Korea, and we obviously had some really good positive receptions to it. I think that a lot of the times APAC gets a bad rap on the socials, and it was really good to see Korea come out of the gates with some really nice innovation, new changes. PSG Talon, of course, well, for going back even one, Talon picked up, merged, partnered, I don't know, with PSG. It's such a weird looking relationship. And then coupled with that, they've picked up Fabian as their new head coach. And obviously you've got Pengu as a content creator. I don't know how much Pengu would have to say in terms of the team aspects, but clearly they've come out of the gates and they look really revitalized, some really solid Siege being played. And I saw a tweet from, I think it was Fabian, saying about like how Nighthaven Labs has not really been a map that they played previously, and now they've played it twice, really going to show that they're expanding their map pool. So as a team, PSG Talon looking great in a region which has struggled recently, Korea that is. D plus Kia have brought some innovation as well with some very fast-paced gameplay. And this is another misconception that kind of tilts me as well. People making comments like, oh, APAC / Korea, it's all about this run and gun meta and they're all about, you know, going fast. Korea could not be more slow last year. They couldn't be more slow if they tried. So to see them pick up the pace here to begin with 2024, really start to innovate a little bit, has been such an amazing blessing for this region. Now, mind you, Playday 2 happened last night. I wasn't able to watch it. I'm assuming you caught probably most of it. I don't know if those trends continued from Playday 1, but nevertheless, good signs early on.
Well, yeah, big W in the column of PSG Talon, of course, and then, yeah, D plus not far behind as well in what they've been able to bring to the table. But, I mean, the bridesmaid to that discussion, FearX, they do not look like they have changed a thing. And Nova coming into this roster, back into this roster from the coaching role with Arakaze jumping out, has got to be the most bewildering roster change that I have seen in a long, long time. I don't know if it's a case of another transfer fell through and that's why Nova's now filling the shoes, but he is not up to par at the moment, unfortunately. And it also doesn't suit the long-term vision of the team. He's quite old and they need some fresh blood in that team to really bring things back up to speed. I made a tweet last night. I said PSG and D Plus are going to the Manchester Major. I'm happy to lock that in now. I do not see a world, unless FearX get a rocket up their ass, that they're going to bring this back. They did not look good at all. And they lost to Weeble. They lost to Weeble. And I was watching the game. They're not playing good Siege at all. It was really disappointing to watch. Again, especially when you put it in the context of both D Plus and PSG Talon getting their shit together. FearX haven't, which is unfortunate because the org is throwing everything they have at the team and the team's just not responding.
Yeah, I've said this pretty publicly as well, but I think the FearX organization has been doing such an amazing job to try and give this roster such a leg up, and they're just not receptive to it. Like, as much as they maybe are trying, I'm not saying they're not trying, but clearly it's just not working. This iteration of this roster's not working. Nova shouldn't be in the lineup. I'm going to just say that now. I know that's probably harsh, but it does look like a stopgap because they just couldn't find a proper replacement for Arakaze. And so clearly they've just gone back to Nova because it feels comfortable. But that's not how you're going to find results. No offense, but I don't think Rin has been a good pickup either for FearX. Looked washed, completely washed back when he was playing for Varel. Retired. So you picked up a retired player who has struggled on Varel and brought them to this roster, then and add them with Nova. I think Good Boy and Mephi Demic aren't bad players. I think if you can get two more solid players around them, then you've got a team that can compete once again. But right now, I agree with you. It doesn't look like FearX are going to be going to the Manchester Major. That's on them to turn that around. The loss to Weeble, not ideal. And look, at the end of the day, you can have a poor group stage and turn it around in the knockout stage. That's just the way, or the playoffs, whatever you want to call it. Although, now, this is something that I've actually noticed. We originally had a conversation before going live, and I can't believe
Don't throw me
I'm
under
more
the
than
bus
happy to
here.
talk. I'm not throwing you under the bus. I'm actually going to throw you from out of the bus.
Okay.
So originally on Liquipedia, it had it with the old format where, you know, you do your group stage, and then from group stage you go to playoffs, or at the time known as knockout stage, and that's where you qualify for the major. Well, it's all been updated, and looking at the Liquipedia now, that top team from deciders goes to the major. So I think that is the playoffs. So you've got to win that grand final. Then you've got the LCQ. So it's essentially the same thing, but it has been kind of changed a little bit. But I think that basically means that for the group stage, does it really matter that much? Or do you want that seeding for the best path forward to the grand final?
I mean, I'm not even making my assessment on who's going to make the major based on who I think is going to finish where in group stage. I just think from the siege we saw week 1, PSG Talent and D Plus are a mile ahead of everyone else, and Fearx are a part of that everyone else. They literally got beat by Weeble.
But this is the thing. One of those teams though has to go to LCQ. So then it like opens up pathways.
I mean, yeah, that is the nature of the format. But again, I'm just making my assessment based on the 2 teams that have played the best so far. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, if for reference, there's been years gone by where we have these kind of like grand finals where both teams have qualified and they just play for like the seeding, right? They just kind of play for who goes to P1, who goes to P2 or whatever. In this instance though, and I agree with you, I think D Plus and PSG Talent look like the best too. But ultimately, one of those is going to have to fall short in the grand final and then drop to an LCQ, where by that point, we are so far removed from like opening play day where Fearx look awful that by the time you get to that LCQ, there's a good chance Fearx could be good again. And that's a real concerning thing. I mean, so that's why I'm not making bold statements on Twitter just yet.
Yeah, but this would be a different story if Fearx, say, brought in a new 18-year-old gunner instead of Nova, and he had a bit of a rough start, whatever, and went, you know, -10 on entry. It's not the case. They've brought in an old player who is not fit to be playing the game at this level, in my opinion, at the moment. And I just don't see... If I saw light at the end of the tunnel, I wouldn't have made that tweet. But for me, it just looks like they are so far behind that unless they pull off a miracle and or PSG/D Plus choke in that LCQ, it's not going to happen.
Probably not. It's going to be very fascinating to watch. Mainly just talking about, of course, South Korea, because that's really all it's begun. Along with NAL, which has also just begun as well. They had their first play day, well, today as of this recording, which included a forfeit as well. Beast Coast getting a free win over Mirage, and I don't know more than anything than that. I'm not very privy to these internal things. We all know what's happening with Mirage. If you want to talk about it, guys, go feel free. But I honestly don't have enough of the information to even bother.
I mean, as far as I understand from what I've followed on socials, Mirage have just not been paying players and stuff on time, which is a real shame. I genuinely don't know more specific details than that, so I can't really comment much more on that. The unfortunate thing for NAL, their actual first play day did end up getting cancelled after a really significant delay due to server issues, which continue to plague the game at season launch. I suppose to some extent this one's maybe a little bit more excusable because the player count is absolutely skyrocketed, so you know, scaling that can be a little bit challenging. But unfortunate for NAL, as far as I understand now, they're actually padding out the games throughout the rest of the year. Now, we had a very similar situation in OS's last stage of 23, where the entire play day ended up getting shifted. But I suppose for logistical problems, especially with, you know, probably flying talent in and whatever, it's a case of being a lot easier and cost effective to just trickle the games out, which means
outside of their last... Outside of their last playday now, it's looking like... the last 2 playdays are 5 matches, and then everything from now to those last 2 playdays will be 6 matches. So it has been padded out just a little bit, which I think is an okay solution. But obviously then there's the talent logistics, for example, that we're quite privy to as to how you kind of fix that. In terms of the players, in terms of the broadcast, I mean, that'll all be fine. But yeah, ultimately though, in terms of some of the results, M80, new roster, big changes there. So you got Spoit, Citizen, Cameraman Kino, and Noodle. And they got off to a good start, 7-4 win over Wildcard on Chalet. I think there's going to be a lot of eyes probably on that M80 roster and as to how they're going to be performing throughout this stage. Obviously, kind of job done with their first match over Wildcard being successful. I'm very curious to see how they go against Sonics next week. That'll be the only match that they actually play will be against Sonics. So I think that's going to be quite curious to see how those two two teams stack up. Oxygen over Lost One, and yeah, Lost One looked pretty poor. Oxygen getting the win. Sonics very comfortably over Dark Zero, like smashed them 7-2 on Clubhouse, which is probably concerning for DZ, but you know, again, similar to kind of like the FearX conversation in Korea, it is also only group stage day one. You probably don't throw the toys out of the cot.
Yeah, and then two round things off SSG over LG, not too unexpected. I think the other interesting discussion point to pick up for NAL specifically is how do we feel about teams like Lost joining, full Brazil roster, full Brazilian organization. You've also got M80, who don't have a single American on the team either. Is that starting to take the piss a little bit?
Does it depend on location though? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like, let's say you had, as an example, 5 Australians that are just like the best of the best, like Bliss ×3 or something, and they're like so good that there's no point being in OS, and they all get picked up by an American organization and go to America. At that point, is there an issue with that?
I'm just saying, does it open the discussion for there having to be more discussion regarding like import rules or whatever? Because it's much like the Revan situation, right?
That's true.
What's to stop these teams? And I can't believe we didn't see it. Just fucking stacking up and going to South Korea and just getting a free spot. That's taking the piss, isn't it?
Probably the money reasons, I guess. There's far more eyes on NAL than there is in South Korea, and then also you've got to go play and live in South Korea, which probably not everyone wants to do.
I do agree.
You get my point. I get your point.
My overarching question is: should there be
like 2 American players on the roster?
Yeah. Should there be a minimum North American player count or a minimum Brazilian count in the Brazil league or whatever the case is?
Yeah, I think there should be. I think it's a little bit crazy that you've got M80, which has got, you know, basically 3 Europeans and 2 Brazilians playing in NAL. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, at that point, you may as well go play actually over in Europe, where you've got actually at least 3 players. And what should then the split be? Should it be 3 players? That's fine. Like, would M80 be fine to go and play in EUL with 3, you know, where you got 2 British players and a Swede? Yeah, like, I think that's fine then, even if you got 2 Brazilians. So that probably is, I think, then the split you need. You probably need 3 players from that region, maybe 2 at a minimum if you really want to be fair, if you really want to be lenient, I should say. But the fact that you've got an entire Brazilian team just sitting in NAL, Brazilian org, 5 Brazilian players, like, there's nothing North American about them. They're from South America. It's a South American org playing in a North American league. It just doesn't really make any sense. So, but again, the only devil's advocate really is if you're good enough and you get invited, then by all means go for it. But yeah, I don't think it's great. I don't think it's a good look. I'd be very like disappointed if, like, in Oceania, for example, we had like a full, you know, Thai team, for example, playing in OS. Like, they're not OS. Like, I don't know what else to say.
No, I agree. I think it's probably
like, you look at Oxygen and I think it's fine, right? Like, Oxygen's got 3 North American players. 2 Brazilian.
And it also opens the floodgates, right? And we have seen this in other esports, like the LCS, for instance, which is now heavily dominated by Asian imports. And there was a whole controversy around that at some point. I stopped
watching when that took off, by the way. Like, I know a little tirade here, but I used to watch LCS back when it first began, and everyone was a North American. And then it started off with, okay, now you get like 1 import slot. And so you have this like star Korean. Every team ended up getting like a star Korean or a star EU player. And then they just lifted it completely. And now everyone is just either Korean or European. And it's like, how do you then foster that talent? Like, I don't care how bad teams might be playing from certain regions. Like, for example, LCS dropped off internationally. And so that's why they probably changed the import rules. But when it comes to Siege, like, you're going to kill North American players' opportunities if you just leave the door open like this. I promise you, give it 5 years or so, maybe, but you will kill it.
Yeah,
you need to put a stop.
That's
the
only reason I'm bringing it up. I'm not saying this is like a absolute indictment on the league and Rainbow Six right now, but as you mentioned, if in 5 years' time 7 of the teams have 4 Brazilians on them, not only is it going to kill the opportunities for those actually from the region, it's going to kill your viewership and it's going to kill people's interest in the league. North Americans are not going to care that fucking much about the Brazilian imports. Like, we've seen that in LCS, and we'll see it again if it isn't reined in.
Yeah, and I think also you kind of look at it from a talent perspective, from our perspective. You know, imagine you go and work the Manchester Major and we're casting M80, and it's like, well, M80 is from NAL. There's nothing North American about them. Like, there's, like, that's it. That's as far as the North Americanness actually comes from. So, Yeah, and obviously we've also seen this in like Lactam, for example, right? Originally, when you kind of look at like what Noodle went and not Lactam, Mena, and you go and look at what's happened with like kind of the original GK and whatnot, and I think it ends up being the same thing, where you don't really want it to be a case of like, okay, we're just going to send a bunch of EU players over to Mena and get a free slot, and like you said, who's stopping a really rich organization from sending a full team over to Japan or Korea and just being like, hey, go play in this league, and you'll have a far higher chance of being able to get to a major. So you got to really think kind of long term about this rather than just short term and being like, oh, okay, it's fine for this stage, whatever. They're not really NAL, but like, where does this then end?
I agree. I'm happy to draw a line in the sand on that rule and on that discussion.
Yeah. And with that, we can probably draw a line as well for this particular episode as well. Obviously not the most conventional episode. Ideally, we'd love to be in studio. Just not to be the case right now. Under renovation. Hopefully, I don't know when we might be in studio again.
I would give it a month. I would say in a month. The goal will be in a month to be back in studio. I don't know what that timeline exactly looks like, but that would be ideal.
Yeah. For those that have made it this far as well into the episode, let us know, is this suffice? Would you rather at least some kind of content being brought out, us discussing esports, the game itself? Obviously, we're not together in studio. This is not the usual Siege show, but I feel like, for me personally, it's better to at least get something like this out than nothing. Gives you guys some content. And so hopefully you guys did enjoy this particular episode. If you did, let us know down below. Hit the like button. Of course, subscribe if you haven't. It really does quite a lot for us. We didn't do our little subscribe spiel at the start, guys.
That's on you. You're the host, not me. It's the Jake and Guzz show. So
that is true. So hopefully, if you're not subscribing, you've made it this far, please hit that subscribe button. Obviously, it means a lot for us. We've got the Patreon as well, as usual, up above, and obviously a big shout out to all of our Patreon subscribers. They've been great. We've been obviously chatting with them so much throughout Six Invitational. They've been able to get really good insight into what's happening behind the scenes. If you would love that kind of insight, along with the giveaways that we were able to do throughout the event, any future events that we do, the same things will be happening behind the scenes, along with giveaways. So if you want to get involved with that, if you want to support obviously the Siege show and us here at Jake and Guzz, feel free to join Patreon, even if it's just joining the Discord. We've got our lovely community that has formed up. If you want to be a part of it, make sure you come on in. Other than that, though, for this episode of the Siege show, can't even speak anymore, we will be bidding everyone farewell. Enjoy stage 1, of course, as it has begun. We're not going to be too far away from kickstarting Oceania, being back in the studio. Can't wait for that as well, and being a part of stage 1 for 2024. And we'll see you in the next episode. Much love.